I'm just going to get this coffee. Welcome, everyone. To those of you who were with us last week's session and those who are new. I'm Pete Granger, a reef net salmon fisherman from Bellingham, Washington. On behalf of the Executive Committee of the Local Catch Network, we're so glad you're able to join us today. The Local Catch Network is a community of practice that is made up of fishermen, organizers, researchers, and consumers from across North America that are committed to providing local, healthful, low impact, and sustainable seafood via community-supported fisheries and other direct marketing arrangements. We hope that you're staying safe and healthy in this challenging time. Local Catch continues to understand that the seafood industry in general and those involved with CSFs and direct marketing are facing incredible challenges to their typical marketing operations. That's why we are working every day to provide you with ideas and resources to cope and a network for communication. Last week, we heard from fishing operations how they are coping with the crisis in their fishing and seafood harvesting and distribution businesses. And many of you shared your experiences as well. Today, we're featuring key speakers who will provide more details on financial and business resources available through the CARES Financial Stimulus Act, passed by Congress on March 26th, and other programs, especially from Canada. But now, as it's important to remember the bounty of the sea and its many gifts to us, I want to introduce Christy Whitmore in British Columbia, Canada. She is a First Nation member and will offer us an Indigenous welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us, Christy.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Christy Whitmore, but my Haida name is Yola Mala, which means she who sits in the front of the canoe. My family is from Haida Gwaii, British Columbia, on the very west coast of British Columbia. It's those little triangle islands. Though I currently live in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island right now, so that's where I'm coming from. And I'd just like to do a bit of a welcome. This is not in our Indigenous language, but I still feel this is important. Today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional land and sea that our ancestors that came before us worked and lived. I want us all to think about the specific ancestors and nations of where you are located currently, right now, and lift up our hands in honor to them today. Today, I ask of our great Creator to help us open our minds and our hearts to what is presented. Help us see the value in the human being through loving each other rather than the material things our world has been so focused on recently. Fill us full of hope and lift our spirits up, O great Creator, so when we finish here today, we feel refreshed and hopeful from the simple act of all of us gathering together. Gayla Kessler. And that's all.
Thank you, Christy, so much for those heartfelt remarks. Now, we'll get started here. We're recording this session, so speakers, please keep your video function on through to the end. We also welcome our media partners and other stakeholders. So let's get started. I'll turn this over to Tyson Razor from our committee to explain some webinar logistics. Tyson?
Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Christy. As we get started today, I just want to remind everyone to please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation, throughout the webinar. As well, if you have the ability to turn your cameras on, we ask that you do turn your cameras on to help create a sense of the network and who's here. And the thoughts of Denisa Livingston and what she brought to the table during our last webinar, creating some social closeness in a time when we're physically distancing ourselves can be a really great thing. So we encourage that, realizing that not all of you can turn your cameras on or have other reasons you need to have them off, which is okay too. Today we're going to have three wonderful presenters. After each presentation, after each speaker, we'll have a few minutes for question and answer period. We're asking that any questions that you have of the speakers or the presenters, you please enter those questions into the chat box. And we're actually going to have Elizabeth Henerdine in the background collecting your questions, finding common themes, and then she'll be bringing those questions to the speakers. So again, if you have a question immediately following each speaker, please put those into the chat box, and Elizabeth will be collating those questions. For those of you that are not familiar, to find your chat box, you can scroll with your mouse over your screen. You'll see a bar that pops up on the bottom of your screen with an icon that says chat. Just click that chat and you'll see the box pop up and you can go from there. At the end of the presentation, after we have taken after each speaker is gone, we'll have a more general kind of question and answer and comment period. We realize that depending on how the conversation goes, this may run a little bit over our estimated end time of 1:30 or 1:30 Eastern time, 10:30 Pacific time, which we're going to be okay with, and we're going to allow it to go over if it needs to continue to ask questions and just kind of spark that conversation a little bit further if needed. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Amy Bassett. She's the District Director for the Main District Office of the United States Small Business Administration.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Amy.
Okay. Thank you, Tyson. My technical skills still need a little polishing apparently here. So since all this began to unravel, our team in the SBA office in Maine has really been working very hard and is very committed to helping Maine small businesses and our partners gain access to information and programs as it has come out. I know there's been a lot of information and there's been a lot of programs, and I'll just really kind of cover what SBA has available. So when I look back, it started for us back when initially there was a process where the governor completed the request to ask SBA for a disaster declaration as related to COVID-19, and that was granted back on March 17th. So when that approval came through, that made available to businesses, small businesses in Maine, what is known as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. You'll hear it called EIDL. The government loves its acronyms. But so currently speaking, that is one program that is available to Maine small businesses. And I won't go into all the details just to save on the time parameters, but in general, these loans can be up to $2 million. The term of the loan can be up to 30 years, and it is a fixed interest rate at 3.75%. What these loans are really designed for is to provide working capital for businesses to sustain themselves through the impacted period. And I know right now for a lot of businesses, it's unknown how long this impacted period will be. So this program does have some flexibility. When the applicant applies, they fill out some basic information, and ultimately what SBA is going to determine is what that working capital need is, and that's where that loan amount will start. They will work closely with the business owner to determine what can be provided and what the terms might be for that eligible small business. Most small businesses are eligible, and certain nonprofits. We do have some business types that are not eligible. The main one that we've sort of bumped into would be ag-related producer businesses. There is an exclusion that those types of businesses are not available, not eligible, but we have determined that aquaculture businesses are available. So I know that may be of interest to some of the folks on the line. It is an online application, So to apply for the economic injury disaster loan would be at sba.gov/disaster. So that is where you can gain more information and also to apply for the loan. Switching gears, it was referred to at the beginning, the CARES Act was signed off by the President on March 27th. And in that piece of legislation, there were several provisions for SBA for programs, but I think the one that most people are interested in and most people are hearing about is the Paycheck Protection Program. And what that program is really designed for, again, is to help small businesses survive and to keep workers paid. So that is the premise behind that program. And since it was signed on March 27th, and we were given a launch date for the program for April 3rd. I've worked for the government for a very long time, and to have something of this magnitude given to us that we had to stand up and launch on April 3rd was a huge undertaking, but I'm happy to report that it did launch. It is available. This program is a little bit different in that you actually make application for the loan at a bank, at a credit union, or a non-bank lender. Most of the entities in Maine are participating with us on this program. And for more information on this program, the website is sba.gov/paycheck protection. You can find the application form there. You can find information there. And again, this use of these loan proceeds is really designed to be for paying payroll. And if the applicant borrows the funds and meets the criteria of using the majority of the loan to make payroll, then that portion of the loan may be forgiven. So it's very important for business owners to check this program out and learn the details. But if there is a piece that is not forgiven, the loan terms are very reasonable on this. The interest rate is fixed at 1%. The loan term is for 2 years. So this is a very helpful program for a lot of small businesses in Maine as well. And I'll pause there. Again, happy to take questions or provide further info.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I think there's been a few questions that have come up already, so we'll let Elizabeth bring those to the table.
Yeah, thanks. Amy, we've got a few questions here. Let's see, our first is whether or not, if you can clarify that wild-caught fishing businesses are eligible for the disaster loans, and if you have any new information on the timeline for the disaster loan applications being processed for those that have already been submitted, both, and what related to that question, both the loan and the $10,000 advance.
Sure. So I know when we started back on March 17th, it was a slow go, and there was a lot of forms and paperwork affiliated with it. And then as every state in the nation received declarations, the volume of the applications really surged. So we have had quite a few approved in Maine, but currently speaking, the online application has been up and functioning for a couple weeks now, and they are working through that queue. If someone has made application back when we first started, we are encouraging them to be sure that they go in and apply with the new online process, because that is what will give them the opportunity to check the box for that advance you were just mentioning. And that advance is, if the person, the business meets the criteria, a portion of that advance may be forgiven. So that is of a lot of interest to a lot of people. But if somebody has applied under the online system, we're getting a lot of calls on people looking for status updates. But I do have an email address and phone number for the customer service center for them, because we locally don't have access to that system.
And it looks like we've got some follow-up questions here. So Tyson, I'll keep going if that sounds
Yeah, that
good.
sounds great. Yep.
Folks would like some more information about double dipping. If you get the Paycheck protection program funds as well as the disaster loan funds.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've had that come up a lot. And so you can get both. You could have perhaps an EIDL loan and you could perhaps apply for a PPP loan, but there isn't a preclusion that you can't double dip. So what our advice to small businesses would be is to fully explore the option of the PPP, because that one is going to be where you can maximize the debt forgiveness, providing that you use those funds for payroll cost. Again, the impetus behind that program really is to keep businesses going and pay wages. So that is how you use that program to maximize the loan forgiveness piece. And then the economic injury disaster loan has other purposes as well, using working capital such as paying rent, utilities, and those types of things. So that might be how you want to make your decisions in that regard.
Got some other questions rolling in here. Sorry, I've got a few chats going, so stand by, and Tyson or others feel free to add some questions or offer questions to Amy while I compile these.
Yeah, one of the questions that's come in is for the PPP loan. Does the loan include, can the loan include, if I'm reading this right, can those loan funds be used for the folks that are like on the boat, for those businesses that are filing like a 1099 miscellaneous? A lot of times the folks that are on the boat with them might be contractors and they're getting a proceed of the revenue that's coming in. Can the 1099 be used to pay those contractors, those deckhands that are normally with these fishing businesses?
That's a great question that has come up a lot. So the documentation that is going to be needed to apply for the PPP is the payroll records. So a small business who is directly paying their employees through regular ways, that's pretty clear. But when it comes to 1099 employees, the way the rules were written is that that isn't looked at as payroll costs to the small business. The 1099 folks are looked at as independent contractors. So 1099 wages are not eligible for the small business owner, but the 1099 contractor could apply for their own PPP loan to cover those wages because they are looked at as self-employed.
And Amy, it sounds like we have quite a few folks on the line who would just appreciate more direct clarification on whether or not wild-caught fishing businesses are eligible for these disaster loans. So I don't know if you could just really clarify and confirm that for us.
For sure, yes. No, we have, I know it, we confuse people when we talk about certain ag businesses, but we have confirmed that aquaculture businesses as well as any kind of fishing business is perfectly eligible to apply. Our only kind of narrow window of folks that we are unfortunately not able to help are agriculture, like people who grow things is the way I sort of have been describing it. But yes, to be direct and to confirm, fishing businesses would be eligible for EIDL.
Great, thank you. Another question we've got coming in is whether or not the disaster loans have a forgivable piece to it, or if that's just the Paycheck protection program.
Yeah, so when the disaster loan originally came out, we did not have the economic injury disaster loan advance component to those. And so I think that's what a lot of people have started to hear about. It's a $10,000 portion of that economic injury disaster loan, and it can be up to $10,000 and up to a portion of that tied to, again, what is paid to employees can be turned into a forgiven component. The guidance we were given is that the up to $10,000 idle advance, it is calculated at $1,000 per employee. We're still fine-tuning that guidance, but my advice to everybody, if you're going to apply for idle, make sure you apply under the new website and you've been able to put your hat in the ring for that economic injury disaster loan advance component. And that's how you're going to maximize getting access to the forgivable piece. On the economic injury disaster loans, if you do receive one of those, just want to make sure people realize there is no cost to apply. We encourage people to apply. And there is also, if the loan is granted and once it's closed, there's an automatic 12-month deferment of the initial payment. So again, SBA recognizes businesses are still recovering. So you don't have to make that first payment for 12 months after that loan is initially closed.
One question we just had come in is, for a lot of fishermen who are fishing in the summertime, if your income is coming from a summer fishery, can you apply in anticipation of potential economic harm?
So it really, they would be seasonal. This question comes up a lot in Maine. We've had it a lot because we have so many seasonal businesses. So what they do permit, and I don't want to give out misinformation, it's very detailed, but they do permit seasonal businesses to look back at sales for a prior year and determine the calculation of impact in that regard. So the loan amount is totally driven based off of past payroll records, but they make this exception for seasonal businesses because we know if you look at the last few months, that may not be an accurate picture of payroll costs for businesses who are seasonal.
Amy, I know one question that's come in and that I've heard quite a bit of has been around how do you apply for the PPP? And I've heard some difficulties in being able to do so. So I'm wondering if you can provide any, just a current status of the applications for the PPP loans and any guidance you might have on for folks to access those loans going forward.
Yeah, I know just to be clear, when you're applying for a PPP loan, that application is actually made at the bank. So while you can pull that loan application form off the website that I mentioned, sba.gov/paycheck protection, what you need to do is have that application and the payroll records to support the loan that you're requesting. So what we did, and we knew this was coming, so we regularly work with lenders throughout the state, and I mean almost every bank, almost every credit union, and some non-bank lenders regularly work with us, and they're working with us on this program. And they committed. These lenders, I talked about that short window of time. These lenders in Maine have been working around the clock since April 3rd to get these applications processed and into the system. Our loan volume just in the last couple of days is probably like 4 times what our annual loan volume normally is. So it's just been unprecedented. But I don't have the main numbers at hand, but just to give you a sense that, I know we've heard of challenges and some lenders are not participating and some lenders are only initially able to help their existing customers. But throughout the country, and this was as of last night, so nationwide, over 302,000 PPP loans have been approved by lenders on behalf of SBA for $80.3 billion. And this has happened amongst 3,450 lenders. So lenders are making these loans, but it's, been a little bit of a rough start for some lenders in that regard.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I know I've been hearing a lot about, at least in the past couple of days, and maybe things are starting to open up a little more now, but just kind of in many places across the nation that the banks tried to roll out on the deadline to open up the PPP applications, got swamped, and they immediately suspended their application process so they could just get through that first tranche of loan applications. So I just want to put that out there for folks as you find those banks that are lending. They may not be accepting applications at this moment. Maybe as of today, that's changed, and there's more banks that are now open and available to take those applications. But I know in the past couple of days, there was some difficulties with banks opening the process and then closing it down again temporarily.
So Amy, we have a few folks who are in similar scenarios, and I'm just going to read this to you and let you answer it. But they say, I'm a sole proprietor, but also LLC single owner, a small seafood supplier with 0 payroll employees. Do I apply for PPP now, or do I have to wait for Friday?
Yeah, so that person is an employee of their own business. And so sole proprietors are all set to apply now. So I would encourage anybody actually to apply now.
Great, thanks for clarifying. Another question we've got here is whether or not disaster loans can be used for capital improvements.
For the economic injury disaster loan, it's really tied to working capital. So you couldn't use it while you could use it to make payments on a loan, you can't use it to refinance a loan. You couldn't use it to buy a boat. You couldn't use it to buy equipment. That's not what that program is designed for. It's really designed to help meet the working capital needs of a business.
Amy, is there any sort of max amount of total relief and or loan support available? Or is there any sort of limit that people should be considering? Do they need to get in now? Will the loan opportunities run out? Can you explain a little bit more about what that looks like on the back end?
Sure. So for the economic injury disaster loan, the maximum loan size is $2 million. That being said, most of the ones we've seen done in Maine are significantly less than that. There are appropriations tied to that, but we're just advising people to get in the queue if they haven't already for economic injury disaster loans, if they would like to go that route. For the Paycheck Protection Loan Program, Congress authorized, currently speaking, up to $350 billion for that program. So I know there's a concern about that money running out, but that's where we're at now. But stay tuned. What we are learning at SBA is things can change not only by the day, but by the minute.
Okay, got maybe a couple. Tyson, how are we on time? I know we've got maybe some more questions rolling in, and I know we'll have time at the very end for additional questions and discussion too.
Yeah, we got started a little bit early, which is great. So it's leaving a little bit more time for a conversation now. So let's go ahead and take a couple more questions.
Great.
This is Laura Snyder. I'm going to jump in here really quickly on one of those topics. So as Amy was just saying, that there is the concern that the money will run out. Yesterday, Senator McConnell started talking about doing a stopgap measure, which sounds kind of like a coronavirus package 1.5, to add additional money for the small business loans. There's talk of him trying to pass it under unanimous consent tomorrow. However, that would mean that every senator would have to agree, and then everybody in the House would need to agree as well. And the Democrats have outlined what they would want to see in that, like, this next immediate package, which would include money for hospitals and states and communities, state stabilization, SNAP program, and also additional money for small business loans. So that is all happening right now. And then it also will depend on, is the Senate able to do this under unanimous consent, not bringing everybody back? And then it would be sent over to the House. And then the House also would have to look at it and say, can we do this under unanimous consent? You guys may have seen with the CARES package that members of Congress actually had to fly back to DC because they had one member of Congress who didn't support it. So that's some of the stuff that they're looking at right now, but certainly I would say one of the most immediate term next steps is trying to get additional money there.
I also would like to just remind folks that a lot of the banks aren't currently accepting these loan applications. They're swamped at the moment. So you may run into barriers in applying for banks. At this point in time, I'd say keep searching and see if you can find a bank that will take you. Otherwise, at this point in time, practice patience and keep checking in daily as things continue to change. There's a lot of people looking for applications at this point, and the banks are working hard in the background to get these loans through. But they have a process that they're kind of developing on the fly as well to get all of this stuff processed. There's a question on here as well, and this one's going to be probably well suited for you, Amy. They were looking at applying for unemployment potentially for one of their winter jobs. As they were looking at applying for unemployment, they were concerned that potentially that would make them ineligible for a disaster relief loan or a PPP loan. Can you talk more about applying for unemployment as well as applying for these loans?
Yeah, and this comes up a lot, and we are by no means experts on unemployment laws, and I know they're catching up too at the state because they've had so much changed and thrown at them as well. So they do have a fact sheet on their website that is the best place to go if you have very specific questions on unemployment insurance. But so what I would say about the PPP loan is remember what the purpose of this is. The purpose of this is to pay wages and get people back into a paid status. So if you borrow funds for this loan program, you really need to use those loan proceeds to pay wages. So you can't pay wages if people are collecting unemployment. There's those crash into each other there. So it's a decision. It's something that small businesses we know are struggling with, but that's the way that program is designed. And I would certainly check out the State of Maine's DOL website for more information on the real specificities on the unemployment stuff.
And Amy, do you have an indication of how long the loan opportunities will be in existence for? Might be just until the money runs out, or is there a timeline or a time frame of when these loans stop becoming available at this point?
So technically speaking, the deadline to apply is the end of June. But as with federal programs, it's tied to the money. So that $350 billion is what we're working with at this current moment in time. And I again, I've been with the federal government for a very long time, and this is completely unprecedented to me, so I really don't exactly know how long it might go.
Another question we have here is under PPP, what types of documentation are allowed to justify payroll expenses for sole proprietors, single member LLC, fishing businesses that don't run a formal payroll, but take an owner, something like an owner draw?
So you're going to need your tax documents and your whatever you use payroll record-wise. You're going to have IRS tax documents, tax returns, or some form of payroll records. Some entities that we hear from use the payroll services or whatever, and they can help provide those documents, but you do need to have payroll records. And I should add, it could be bank records too. You know, maybe if you're utilizing your bank records, check in that regard. But I think some of the confusion might be with the way contractors are paid. And again, those 1099 employees wouldn't be eligible employees because they can apply by themselves.
And Amy, one last question for you. Elizabeth, do you have one you want to bring?
I'll let you go, and I'll compile the rest for the end.
Great. The one last question I'm looking at here says that the loan forgiveness requirements have been confusing and to many small businesses. The current requirements state that in order for a PPP loan to be forgiven, 75% of the loan must be spent on payroll within 8 weeks after funds have been released, which can put small businesses that are closed in a tricky situation. Either they're asking their employees to come back to work before the business is open, or paying people for not coming to work. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I just did a webinar this morning and this exact question came up. So just to be clear, you know, the PPP loan, if the business uses the proceeds for things, there are some other eligible uses, but that can reduce the forgiveness component. But that's the way the program was written, that to maximize and get the whole loan forgiveness, at least 75% of the loan proceeds must be used to pay payroll. So we know that some businesses are not allowed to be open right now because there are certain restrictions in place, but there is still a way that you could pay those employees. They wouldn't be on the unemployment rolls, but these are some of the decisions that businesses are faced with. But that is, again, what the intent of the program was for, is to pay wages. So that is a bit of a decision that business owners have to make. And we have business advisors that are affiliated with SBA and others that are out there that are providing a lot of help and a lot of guidance to businesses trying to make these decisions.
Thank you so much for answering all of our questions and taking the time here today, Amy. Will you be sticking around for the till the end of the webinar, or if not, just thank you for joining us. Will you be sticking around till the end?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to stick around. Sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll have some follow-up questions at the end. Now I would like to welcome Laura Snyder. She's the staff director for the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee and of the Natural House Resources Committee. Laura, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Are you going to have anyone talk at all about the fisheries disaster program at NOAA, or do you want me to touch on what I've heard recently on that?
I think it would be great if you could also touch on what you've heard recently about that. I know a lot of people are curious.
Okay, great. So everything that I'm going to be saying to you today could change in a couple hours. I think when I spoke to Josh last week, things looked very different, and they are fluid and changing every day. So first, let me say I'm like you said, I'm the staff director for the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee for the House Natural Resources Committee. In the CARES package, as many of you know, that there was $300 million for NOAA for fisheries disaster relief. My understanding of where that money is right now is that NOAA is working on developing allocations based on landings and revenue, both for aquaculture and for wild caught for each state, and using that allocation, and then are going to be working like with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and the other fishery commissions, the more regional ones, because they have they are able to better get money out the door more quickly. I don't know what the timeline for all of this is, but I know that there are a lot of conversations ongoing, and I will be sure as I hear information, I will be sure to share it with Josh or Tyson, so you all know how to try and get that money. So first wanted to say that. I also wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about next steps for Congress, and again, changing very every hour, every day. So as I mentioned, it seems like the next potential piece of legislation that could be coming out of both the Senate and the House would be that stopgap measure, the coronavirus 1.5, of getting additional money for the SNAP program, for hospitals, for states, and for the small business loan. So those negotiations are happening right now. And like I said, Senator McConnell said that he was going to try and pass that under unanimous consent tomorrow, is what we've been hearing. And I would imagine there's probably conversations going on between him and Schumer and Pelosi, because Pelosi's team sent out a Dear Colleague today outlining some of the stuff that we would need, that the Democrats would need to see in it. And then they'll have to figure out of how to actually get it through on the House side. And do we need to bring people back to town? So that's the first thing. The House and the Senate are both scheduled to come back to town April 20th. I think that is still very much up in the air. There haven't been any announcements otherwise, but DC is on a stay at home until the end of the month. And so we'll see what happens with that. The next thing that people are going to be talking about, I believe, the next package is going to be of coronavirus 4. And there's been a lot of debate of what that's going to look like. What we're hearing right now is the House version may be very similar to what the House response to coronavirus package 3, CARES, the Senate package. The House came out with language in response to the Senate bill that we would, that may be the next thing that we're looking at, and still thinking about mitigation and dealing with the current crisis in front of us. I think that there is a real desire, especially from Democrats, to then eventually start to look at more of a recovery type of bill, an infrastructure package, stimulus package, where I think that is going to be where a lot more of these pieces could potentially come in. I know somebody just reached out to me about like the Young Fishermen's Act. I've seen letters about that. Stuff about restoration grants for local communities, and that those types of things could maybe come into play much further down the road. So that's kind of where we are with how everything is looking. But we, I'm getting letters and having conversations with folks that are affected by this of, here's some of the stuff that we need. These are some of the things that Congress really should be thinking about. So I'm happy to hear from you all of what ideas are out there, what resources are needed. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Laura. We've got a few questions coming in here. Stand by. Okay, maybe just some, oh, go ahead.
Do you want me to just look at these and answer them?
That if you want to do that too, yeah, I've got sort of them coming in from a few places, but yeah, if you want to start there.
Okay. Disaster police. Does the fisheries disaster police include oyster aquaculture? Yes, there was language through some of the negotiations of getting that language in. They made sure that aquaculture was covered. So yes. So are the fisheries disaster relief funds, the 300 million allocated specifically to industry, or is that a separate pot of funds? So NOAA got the 300 million. Are you guys familiar with fishery disaster declarations that we had before this? So here, I'll just talk about that a little bit. So, you know, when there's a hurricane or if there's like the status of the stock is impacted, there can be fishery disaster declarations and then money can go out that way. When this first started happening and we were hearing from stakeholders of how badly the industry was being hit from coronavirus, I reached out to NOAA, others reached out to NOAA and asked if we could declare fisheries disasters under current law to be able to cover this issue and the economic losses that fishermen were feeling. And their answer was no, because it was not about the status of the stock. That it didn't cover it under the current definition. And so that was when, you know, Senator Cantwell led a really critical role, and other senators and members pushed for this language, but they did not want to do it through the actual fisheries, like just changing the definition within the current fisheries disasters, because it takes so long to actually get that money out the door. There's some fisheries disaster declarations and it's years later and they still don't have the money. And so that's how they did it, did the language to tell NOAA that here's 300 million, and that the economic losses had to be over 35%, et cetera. So NOAA's figuring out how to get that money out. This, like I said, could change. This is based on a conversation that I had earlier this week, that NOAA is looking at allocations for each state based on like charter, aquaculture, and landings of how much should each state be getting of that 300 million. And then letting the states work with the like ASFMC and whatnot that get that money to the fishermen and out the door. I don't know what information is all going to be required. I have heard, because there is that concern about that 35% economic losses, that they're looking at being able to say, okay, here was my, what we made in February and March of this year compared to February and March of last year, to demonstrate that. But again, this is all, they're still figuring it out. I don't know when the decision will be made of how to start getting that money out. I've been saying to folks who've been asking if you're wanting to prepare to try and get some of that money, is go look at the actual fisheries disaster declarations that was in previous law, and look at the information that they ask for that, and start gathering that type of information. But again, I will, as soon as I hear anything, I will let Tyson and Joshua know of what the next steps are. But NOAA is figuring that out right now.
And I guess,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, related to that, Laura, in general, how would you recommend that folks, you know, a lot of stakeholders on this call, stay informed and engaged in some of these discussions and decisions that are happening around future bills?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of recommendations for you. Number one, even through the process of trying to get any of the loans, any of this, you should be reaching out to your local member of Congress and working with them. And they can help you navigate the system. You also should be building them as champions. Like I'm hearing in my position, I hear from, different members who have a lot of constituents who are being impacted. And it means a lot having them push leadership, push us and say, this is what we're hearing from our fishermen. This is what they would need. So developing those relationships with congressional staff is really important. I think it would be great if you all, since you're an organization, if somebody could kind of take the lead and do a sign-on letters, mean a lot. Do a sign-on letter and you where you all kind of say, here are some of the things that we would need. I've been getting them from a number of industry groups. Like there's one of the asks that's going around is that 300 million really should be 1.5 billion. There's been asked about, can Department of Commerce or other federal agencies buy the surplus of the seafood that's out there? We're seeing some of these different ideas. Let me say, no promises, no guarantees, but unless if we're hearing from people about some of the ideas, it's certainly not going to happen. So I would strongly consider seeing if you all can organize a sign-on letter of saying, here are some of the things that we asked for. And then the other thing is, send me emails. My email is laura.snyder@mail.house.gov. It's Laura, L-O-R-A. You can see that, I think, on the screen. But we want to hear from you, and it was members of Congress who heard from constituents like yourselves that got that 300 million in, and they fought hard for it. So that is, important. And I know some of my members on the committee are writing a letter to NOAA of making sure that how they distribute these funds is fair and transparent, and get them out the door as quickly as possible. So we'll continue to watch over this throughout the process.
Yeah, and related to that, we've got a few questions here to just maybe clarify on who the money is intended for. So for the fisheries money, is that intended to be used and distributed at the vessel level, or the seafood wholesale, retail business level? Will those kinds of entities be eligible? And then the other part of this question is the fisheries money also intended to be used for recreational charter fishing businesses and that's
so it is not for recreational. So it says the Secretary of Commerce is authorized to provide assistance to tribal, subsistence, commercial, and charter fishery participants affected by the coronavirus. And it says fishery participants includes tribes, fishing communities, aquaculture businesses, not otherwise eligible for assistance under the ag program, processors or other fishery-related businesses who have incurred as a direct or indirect result of the coronavirus pandemic revenue losses greater than 35% as compared to the prior 5-year average. And see, that's where I was saying that they may not look at it for the full year, but just look at it based on months. Any negative impacts to subsistence, cultural, or ceremonial fisheries. And then it's, it's the 300 million to remain available until September 30th, 2021. So again, NOAA is going through the process right now of determining how to get this money out and who all would be eligible.
Great, thanks. Let's see.
Somebody wants my email address again. Sorry, I see that. It's Laura, L-O-R-A .Snyder, S-N-Y-D-E-R @mail.house.gov. Here, can I how do I could just respond, but I don't know how to do that.
I bet one of us can figure out. We'll type it in. We'll be sure to get some the chat. Thank you, Elma.
And for those of you, if you don't know your member of Congress or how to reach them, if you just go to like Google find my representative, you put in your zip code and then I'll get you all that information. But you should be talking to your local member office right now.
We've got one person asking, they say they've been hearing that NOAA has been asking for information from fishermen via an email, nims.covid19@noaa.gov, and that the responses might dictate how the stimulus funds are allocated, and they're wondering if that is true, Laura.
I've not seen that. It doesn't mean that it's not true.
Okay.
It makes sense. They should be gathering information.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe time for one or two more questions, Elizabeth.
Okay. So scroll back. Let's see. We had a question just as far as going back to eligibility. You know, Laura, in the language that you read, fishing communities was listed in there, and folks are wondering what does that mean as far as what kind of projects exactly?
So I would need to dig into that a little bit. I think fishing communities is language from the fisheries disaster, like the previous. So I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
And I'm not, and again, I don't know. Obviously, NOAA has to make all the interpretation.
Exactly, later on.
But my guess is that it's based off of that language. So there's probably examples.
Yep. Let's see.
What about new businesses that don't have data to support the 5-year average? That's a good question. That I think is something to ask NOAA about, because that also is based off of the fishery disaster previous language, and so I wonder how they've dealt with that before.
I've also got a question regarding in the fund distribution, you know, how, if it's going to be required at all for funds to be given to just, let's say, domestic businesses versus US subsidiaries of foreign companies. And yeah, what, any sort of preference or guidelines that there might be for that.
So are you like foreign-owned businesses that are operating here?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. I mean, I can do some digging to see. I'm assuming that the email address that was mentioned here is accurate if they got it from NOAA, but that would be an important point to make to them, to make to NOAA.
Okay.
We're going to have to call this question and answer period for now complete. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Elizabeth. We're going to move on to our next guest speaker. And keep in mind at the end of this forum, we'll come back around to more general question and answer period. So hopefully if you haven't had your questions answered yet, we'll be able to bring those back up. Next, I would like to introduce Christy Whitmore, Business Development Advisor of the Castleman Group, a liaison between the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Pacific Integrated Commercial Fisheries Initiative and 24 commercial fishing enterprises in British Columbia. Thanks for joining us, Christy.
Thank you so much, Tyson, and all your information, Amy and Laura, because it's interesting to see some of the comparisons between what's happening here in Canada and British Columbia versus what is happening in the US. in some ways, I feel that your country is much further ahead than Canada in some ways. But I think the underlying theme that we're hearing every place is that things are changing hourly and daily. So, you know, I was all ready for the webinar and all my information. And then this morning, because we're 3 hours here ahead, it was announced that commercial fishing is now deemed as an essential service in Canada, which is wonderful on one hand, but because it's deemed as essential service, now we're going to have some difficulties with some of the funding and monies and everything. Well, just how everything goes over, because the problem is that people aren't buying the fish, right? So, and I'm sure you're having the same issue down there. So it's a essential service. They're telling the fishers to go out fishing, but who's going to buy it? And because our large buyers are not buying currently, and our large buyers are telling our fishers to stay at home because there is no markets. So we're sort of going through this confused time of change, just as the whole world seems to be going. So that's kind of how I'm going to start. Before this morning, fishers with their deckhands were able to get some relief in the EI, or employment insurance benefits. And for the Canadian or Canada Emergency Response Benefit, they were eligible under that one because they were displaced from their work because of the COVID. But now we don't know how that's going to happen now that they're considered essential service. So this is how our information is changing so quickly, and I'm almost afraid to give you wrong information, you know. Of course, up here in Canada, we have a goods and services tax, and every Canadian, it doesn't matter if you're a fisher or not, will be receiving an extra benefit for that of about $500 or $400. Yeah, so per individual if you receive the GST. So that's going to help quite a few of our deckhands out. Then things like our student loans out here, and they've all been, you know, deferred. Right now, any of our banks, you can go in, it doesn't matter what sort of loan you have, whether it's a fishing loan or whether it's a car loan, you can ask for deferrals for up to 3 months currently, and the banks are not allowed to refuse you for that. Which is great. We have a BC Hydro credit that has been put out to be applied for 3 months, which is quite nice. And again, if you've been displaced by the COVID, but unfortunately, now that commercial fishing is being deemed as essential service, it puts all of our fishers in a different ball of wax. Now, the Canadian Emergency Business account or fund will loan you up to $40,000, similar to what Amy was speaking of, if you have to help out with payroll relief. But your payroll had to be between 50,000 to 1 million to be eligible for that, which a lot of our fishers don't fall into that category, unfortunately. But under the small business loan, there was monies available to try to help the fishers make ends meet if they've got any sort of loan issues at this point in time. So that is the few things that we have available right now, but everything's on hold until we hear more today of how this is going to go forward now that the fishers are deemed as essential services. The one thing that we have put into place, and I know it's not funding, but it's just something that is that came out with our Young Fishers group, which I think one of your members, Davey, is part of, and probably several others that are on here, is they came out with just sort of ways to get your boat ready, and with the COVID-19, the protocols to get your boat ready, just pre-season sort of stuff, making sure that your crew members are not sick before they go on board, that when you do your shopping within the community, you make sure you take your clothes and put them in garbage bags, and disinfecting and different things like that, and really not going into any small communities that, or isolated communities that maybe you would have stopped in to pick up a little bit of groceries. They're asking that you don't do that anymore. So, and that's been circulated throughout our full fishing communities, which is great, and the fishermen are quite on board with that. The feedback I've heard has been very good that way. I realize that that isn't part of funding, but I can still put that up on, after all of this, we'll put a few links, I think, Tyson, and some links to all of this. So yeah, I don't think I really want to go into much else because of this new unfolding sort of news that we had this morning about the fishers being essential services. The ones that I did talk to this morning, they were just saying, well, yeah, we can catch the fish, but who's going to buy the fish? And that's the biggest question right now. So here we go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christy. And we will take any links that you have if you want to email those over to me. We have a current resource document where we've been compiling resources from around North America and putting them into one document for a place to find. So we can include those resources in that document. Send them over.
Great. I'm sorry that I just really don't have a lot more information for you, but the changes are like what everybody's saying, they are happening so quickly and so fluidly that that nobody really knows where people are standing at this point in time. So.
Yep, looks like we just got one comment that said some of the fisheries were declared essential services in other provinces a few weeks ago. And it should not change the CERB or EI programs. So, comment on that.
Yeah, Tyson, this is Pete. I have a question for Christy. Christy, we're faced here in Washington State and then in Alaska with the possibility that fisheries may not be prosecuted because Alaska is not allowing fishermen, processors, and workers to fly into the state unless they have a quarantine for 2 weeks. And it's very problematic, especially for isolated villages and where fishing processing plants are. Do you have that kind of thing? I know the markets are one thing, but just getting the fish processed too. Do you have that problem?
So, so far the way it's looking like is that most of our processing plants, we're not having people fly in like what Alaska does. And I am aware of Alaska's procedures because my daughter is one of those lucky people that fishes out of Alaska, which is wonderful. So our people live here, and so they're our workers live within close proximities of the plants. And they are supposed to be temperature registered before they go into the plants. Just double checking that their temperatures are at normal levels, which is supposed to be the way to screen for the testing, whether that is fully accurate or not. So it's not a difficulty of our plant workers. The one issue is really the fishers are just not allowed off their boats now. When they come to deliver, they're asked to stay on their boats if they can. because they don't want any cross-contamination from community to community. And like I said, the young fishers, they came out with not going into the small remote communities that may be very self-isolating as it is. So to stop the cross-contamination, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Christy. Really appreciate you and your time here today. And thank you for the wonderful and warm welcome as well.
You're welcome, Tyson. I think you guys are doing a great job, and yeah, so carry on.
Okay, we will do. All right, everyone, this brings us to our more general open question and answer period. How we're gonna do this is gonna be similar to our last webinar, where we're gonna ask you to raise your hands, and we'll take questions or comments in the order that those hands are raised. Once again, for a reminder on how to raise your hands, if you take your mouse and scroll it over your screen, go down to where it says participants, click that participants button. You'll see the bar open on the right-hand side of your screen. And at the bottom of that bar, there's another button there. It says raise hand. If you click that, that'll allow you to put your hand up, and then we'll begin to take those questions in the order that they come. So we'll just go ahead and start with that format and see how it goes. If we get a lot of questions, we are willing to let the webinar continue to run past our anticipated 1:30 end time for this webinar. Okay, it looks like we have the first question from Keith Butterfield. Keith, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for providing this resource to us. My question is, if I have working capital expenses coming up this season, is there a loan program that allows for me to include gear purchases?
Sorry, I was on multiple mutes there. So through the SBA loan programs, our regular programs, we do have loan products here that can be used for equipment purchases and that type of thing. So again, those loan programs work through local banks and local credit unions. So when you're meeting with your lender, you can certainly bring that up. So you could have multiple products to address the needs of your business.
That's the disaster relief SBA loan, not the PPP loan, right?
So just not to be too confusing, but it's neither of those that I'm making reference to. SBA in regular times has loan guarantee programs that work through local banks and local credit unions. And this is a regular loan that can be accessed at any point in time by a small business. And those loans can be used for most business purposes and equipment purchases, debt refinancing, purchasing buildings and things. Those can all be the use of proceeds for those loans.
Okay, thanks.
Elizabeth, were there any remaining questions that we didn't get to previously that still need to be kind of brought to the surface?
Yeah, we've got a few here. So Amy says a question for you, and I'm going to read both sort of it's an observation and a question. So this person says, people of color, immigrants, low-income communities, and business owners, many of which are fishermen and farmers, are experiencing major challenges with the stimulus program. They say these business owners don't have traditional banking relationships, which is a major requirement for accessing the funds. And many of the entities they use include community banks, credit unions, microlenders, check cashing companies, which are not eligible for administering the funds. So the question is, will SBNA open this up to other non-traditional lenders? Curious if you could respond to that.
Sure. So, and I I'm not exactly sure if this person is in Maine, but so I just know in talking to our lenders throughout the state, we have just about every bank and credit union in the state of Maine that is working with us and trying to participate, if not already participating. Some of the lenders that were newer to us, it's been a little bit harder because they weren't familiar with our processes. We're working really hard to get them up to speed, but just about every bank and credit union is trying to work with us in Maine. There is conversation about bringing in some non-lending institutions like fintech type entities to sort of, on a more global scale, help those businesses that don't have any banking relationship. But when I look at who's working with us in Maine, it is your next door neighbor credit union. It is your next door neighbor bank. So I know because of the volume, a lot of them need to first work with their existing customers. So it is a bit of a challenge, but that's really the best advice that I have at this point.
Thanks. And another question for you, Amy, while you have the mic. Some folks want just clarification or maybe a finer definition of what economic injury or disruption means. There's one example is this fisherman watches their kids in the winter and fishes in the summer. Daycare is closed right now because of coronavirus, and it's going to be challenging to fish as much as they normally would in the coming months due to lack of childcare. And they're wondering if a situation like that would make them eligible for a loan.
So these are really tied to business expenses and business working capital needs. So that would be, very unfortunate. And I know how it is very, very difficult on small business owners in many regards right now. But the economic injury disaster loan is really tied towards the economic impact on the business. So what are the working capital needs of that business now that are being impacted, given all that's going on? And what are those working capital needs of the business looking forward, and how long might it take to recover? So that is really what would be eligible for the economic injury disaster loan.
Thank you. Do we still have Laura on the line? Laura, are you out there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Just a question or comment for you that came through was, along the lines of things for elected officials to be aware of is that, there are a lot of fishermen who lease their fishing permits or lease fishing permits from owners of the permits on an annual basis. And so fishermen's wondering how they'd be assured that the person who leased the permit to catch the fish will be able to use the catch towards their annual numbers total. I'm not sure if that...
I thought I knew where this was going. I don't know whoever asked that question. It was a little unclear to me. I know this is about, people that with catch shares that end up giving their quota to others. But I don't know that I fully understand the question.
And I think Amy Grandin, if you're still on, I think that was your question. I'd invite you to maybe expand on that, because I'm guessing there are a few folks wondering about it.
This is Amy. So I know that when, if like in disaster relief, Greg and I lease a permit from a friend who no longer fishes in Washington, but he's held on to the permit. So even though we catch the fish, we don't own the permit, so it's not tied to us. So in times of disaster relief, we're not eligible because we don't own the permit. So. Oh,
really? Yeah. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Thank you.
My guess, this is all my best guess. A lot of the regulations that are in place for regular fisheries disasters, I think that they won't make too many changes to some of those requirements with getting this money out. So again, I know somebody put up the email address. I think that would be something you should ask, but I would imagine if previously you weren't eligible for it, that there's probably the same potential that you would not be eligible.
And that's
But I guess-
understandable, but it might be something like along the lines of you're talking about making aware to elected officials, because
Yeah,
there are a lot of people, not a bad pun, we're in the same boat where it's expensive
Yeah.
to buy a permit. And so you can't get the capital together to buy a permit. So you lease it at a lower rate from someone else. So you're kind of in this catch-22 area, you know, of,
yeah,
so-
yeah.
So
So previously, are you part of a fishery that's had a federal disaster before,
yeah.
and you didn't get it?
No. So like in the Washington Troll Fleet is one example of it. So, and it's it's not a catch share situation. It's a limited, I'm losing the word.
Lap.
Yeah.
Limited access.
Limited access. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Just something to pack away in the questions that may come up later. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
It looks like we have a question from Andrea Tomlinson. Andrea, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to see everyone on the Local Catch Network. This is very inspiring for me weekly. My question is for Amy. Amy, just a couple of things. So, we have the community seafood. We work with local fishermen here in New Hampshire, and I'm trying to get the word out specifically to captains and deckhands. So, two questions. Am I understanding you correctly that the only forgivable part of the EIDL is related to wages? That's my first question. And then for deckhands and sternmen who are obviously self-employed, getting 1099 by the captain, would it be more advantageous for them to apply for the PPP or for unemployment right now if they are not fishing?
So I had a little trouble hearing you, but I think I caught the gist. So for economic injury disaster loan, that up to $10,000 advance, some of the details are being ironed out on that, but it's tied towards employees. So that is the only portion that could potentially be forgiven. Regarding 1099 employees, yep, to reaffirm, they are independent business as the way they're being looked at under this program. So a 1099 person would apply for their own PPP.
So can you hear me okay now, Amy?
A little bit.
Yeah, so funny. I have such a loud voice. My question really is, would it be more advantageous for those sternmen and deckhands to apply for unemployment or as independent businesses through PPP?
Yeah, that's not something I can advise somebody on because I'm not familiar with the unemployment benefits, and that's something that they're going to need to make a determination on their own. If they get the details from the Department of Labor, they could then compare those to what is available under the PPP, but that isn't really something I can comment on.
Okay.
I don't know what you've heard, Andrea, or anyone else, but I did call our unemployment offices, a couple of them yesterday, and tried to just see what was going on, talk with them about deckhands, talk with them about captains and unemployment. And all they could really tell me was, if you see yourself as unemployed right now, file for unemployment, do what you need to do, and then see if you actually get anything from it. You might not, and you might, and they couldn't provide me any further advice than that. So as far as unemployment goes for somebody that's contracting as a deckhand, in the nature of why they're filing and the case that they make, they may or may not get unemployment, and I couldn't really get a concrete answer. And I called a couple different people, and they both gave me the same response, which is they couldn't provide me any specific guidance other than to say, if you consider yourself unemployed, file. So
Right.
I understand your question about which one or the other, but I just wanted to throw that there for the unemployment side as well.
Right. So here in New Hampshire, they're saying they're encouraging people who are self-employed to apply. And then there's a additional unemployment allocation for people who make at least $41,000 and $100,000 a year. So ironically, I think some veterans could sadly make more money on unemployment right now than they could be doing fishing. But yeah, I do have a contact because we have to be pushing our community supported fishery season back in a month. So I do have a contact for unemployment. So I'll follow that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Elizabeth, are there any other questions that we want to check in on, bring up for conversation?
I think those are the big ones that I've seen come through, but if I've missed you, feel free to raise your hand, but I think we've got the big ones.
Okay. Pete Helme, I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is Pete Helme. I have a question because it seems like fishermen are caught in the catch-22 here, not to be too rude on this. We belong to a marketing association. The marketing association gives us 1099. This is based on the fish sold. But the PPP gives money to replace payroll, or the forgiven part is to replace payroll. Well, this allows the fishermen to be paid to go fishing. So they go out and go fishing. But when they come back, since they've been paid, they can't sell their catch, so they give their catch away. Is that the way this program works? You understand the problem that we're not paid on the hours that we work. We're paid on the catch that we make, and the money, even catching it doesn't give us anything. It's selling the catch that gives us the reward. So we can go fishing, and we're paid now under the PPP, or the forgiven part, to go fishing. This doesn't do a damn bit of good, unless the purpose is to give away fish. And so I don't know if filing PPP does it any good, especially since it can't be forgiven if it's a loan.
So I know it's a unique situation that businesses or a person who receives their income through the 1099 process. And again, this is the guidance that I have at this current point in time. There could be something further, and stay tuned, but that is the guidance that I have at this time. And I apologize, but I don't have any more detailed answers that I can give you. That's the program for the 1099 employees isn't as easy of a fit as it is for a business with employees that are paid directly.
It looks like there's one other question about the PPP that I'm seeing here. And it's asking, is there a difference on how an LLC and a pass-through S corporation apply to the loan regarding payroll?
Yeah, it's all about the payroll records. So however that business, regardless of the type of entity, pays their employees, that payroll record is what is going to be used to determine the loan amount. So if the income passes through directly on someone's personal tax return, that would be the documentation that would be used to look at what defines wages and income.
Okay, looks like we have maybe one last question. Nicole, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, this question's for Laura, talking about the NOAA reimbursement, or not reimbursement, but support. You mentioned subsistence, and I'd like to see if there's any clarification on what's meant by that. how that would work.
Nicole and Tyson, sorry. Laura had to leave the call.
Okay.
But maybe we could follow up with email to Laura and get back to you, Nicole.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll put my email up here in the window.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to everybody for joining the call. Thank you for your time. I'd like to pass this back over to Pete Granger.
Thanks, Tyson, and thanks for all the work you've done, and Elizabeth as well, during the session today. And thank everyone for participating, and especially to our featured speakers. Thank you so much. I'm again heartened by the sharing that took place today, as I was last week. If you have comments, please send them to us at Local Catch. And as I mentioned in the introductory remarks, we're looking to offer another webinar soon, concentrating on the latest information on the $300 million stimulus allocated to U.S. fisheries. We had a tremendous amount of questions about that today that unfortunately can't quite be answered yet. So we're going to time our next webinar to when we have sufficient information on that allocation, so that then we can really get into that. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and eat fish. Thanks, everyone.